It's day 5,941 of us being in business, and we are so happy to have Erica Machulak and Sally Haldorson here. Erica Machulak is the founder of Hikma, a social impact startup with a mission to mobilize scholarship for the public good through consulting, training, and storytelling. Her work has been published in Inside Higher Ed, the Yearbook of the England Studies and Humanities, and the Magazine of National Endowment for Humanities. Sally Haldorson is the managing director of Porchlight Books. Annie Maxfield of Imagine PhD calls Hustles for Humanists a, quote, roadmap for entrepreneurs who hate the word entrepreneur. This book affirms the value and need for humanistic work in all industries and provides clear and actionable steps for humanists to pursue meaningful work and get paid for it. Please give them a warm welcome.
Thank you so much for everyone who is here today, and I'm so glad to see such a big house, and we're excited to talk about Hustles for Humanists. I am, as Ingrid said, Sally Haldorson, the managing director of Porchlight Book Company, and because we are at Boswell tonight, and I know there are a lot of local folks here, Porchlight Book Company grew out of the Harry W. Schwartz bookshops, if you remember any of those. And we are still owned and run by the Schwartz family. Now, instead of a brick and mortar store like Boswell's, we're experts in shipping books in large quantities all over the world, partnering with authors, publishers, and companies to connect people with books on a large scale. But we also love when we can revisit our roots and partner with Boswell to highlight great books and converse with their authors. So I'm going to hold the floor for just a few minutes while we get comfortable and tell a little bit of a story, and then we'll turn it over to Erica, who you actually came here to see, and not me. But I think hopefully I'll bring it around to explain why I tell you the story. I graduated from a small liberal arts college in Minnesota in the early 90s. If anyone else was young in the early 90s, you know there was not much of a job market. It may have been worse than now. I don't have data, but we certainly thought that it was the worst job market in the world, or in history. At that school, there was an option to enroll in something called the Pear College, in which we could design our own major. One of the big talking points about the Pear College was that the guy who designed the Frisbee got a degree from the Pear College and created his own major, and the Frisbee came out of that. It was a great experience, and I graduated with a BA in English literature, creative nonfiction writing, women's studies, and a sprinkling of religious studies by root of women's studies. And after graduation, I did what any self-respecting 21-year-old with a BA in English literature, creative nonfiction writing, women's studies, and religious studies would do. I got a job at a bookstore.
I was gonna say bar.
Well, good guess, right? I did study to be a waitress for 2 weeks, and I couldn't have you. I'm just going to tell you that right now. That bookstore happened to be in the Mall of America, and I was paid $6.50 an hour. Eventually, I got a promotion and a raise to $7.25 an hour. But that kind of pay does not make a lifestyle, though I did meet my husband there, so I became rich in a different way. So I began interviewing and looking for another job. I remember one interview at a nonprofit where I sat, self-conscious, in a really bad suit, trying to explain why I should be hired with a degree but no real-world experience. I didn't know then that I had a lot of skills that I developed while I was in college, but I didn't know how to translate them into skills that an organization would value. So instead of finding a good job, quote unquote, I found a job, one that paid $10 an hour and required me to push a mail cart through the office of a high-end insurance brokerage firm. I've done a lot of jobs in my life that challenged my endurance and my humility, including weeding bean fields and cleaning Super 8 motel rooms, but that mail cart might have challenged me the most. So I did what any underemployed BA in English literature, creative nonfiction writing, women's studies, and a sprinkling of religious studies would do. I applied for grad school. Academia would be my route to better pay, a better life, and becoming the writer that I wanted to become. That decision brought me to Milwaukee, where I got a master's in creative writing fiction just because I needed to do one more different thing. But only ever after having to defend my thesis, which was a collection of fiction short stories, one of my advisors showed up to my thesis defense wearing a "would you like fries with that" t-shirt, implying not so subtly that this thing that I had strived so hard to achieve, a master's degree in something that I loved, would gain me nothing but a job in the service industry, which of course, I've been in the service industry for the last 30 years, so she was not completely wrong. My professor of creative writing was making a joke about her own students' employment prospects. Again, I found myself out of school with a fresh degree. My husband, who'd supported me through grad school, wanted to go back to school, so I needed to get a job. And I did what any self-respecting BA in English literature and master's degree in creative writing would do. I got a job at a bookstore. And yes, in customer service. I got a job in the customer service department of Schwartz Business Books, which was the business book division of the Harry W. Schwartz bookshops, which would become 800 CEO Read, which would later become Porchlight Book Company, where I'm still employed some 28 years later. And that's because I was lucky to find an organization who encouraged me to use the skills I developed while in college and in grad school. Not just reading and writing, but critical thinking, analytical thinking, relational thinking, the ability to research and coalesce a large volume of information and present an argument from my deductions. Just think if I'd been able to articulate that when I was younger. And that's why I am so grateful to have Erica here, to have Hustles for Humanists, building, a business with purpose. I have it open. Here tonight, because this is the book I needed when I was 20 years old, and this is the book I needed when I was 25 years old, which is not to say any of my degrees were a waste of time, but to say that if I had had direction, if I had known how to articulate my skills into something where I could use them to do the good work that I knew that I was capable of doing, then I may have got to where I was going a little bit faster. So we are grateful to have you here. We're grateful for this book. And now, after all of that, hopefully you understand why I brought the story to light, but we are so thankful for this book and so thankful to talk about it tonight. So, the first thing we're going to do is have Erica read a little bit from this very special gift to all of us who need a little direction.
Well, I'm very happy to, but just real quick, thank you to everyone for being here. This is an incredible crowd. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me to get to do this in my hometown, that everyone showed up. And thank you to you, Sally, and Gabby, and Daniel, and Rebecca, and Ingrid, and everybody who's worked a lot to make this happen. I really appreciate it. I also was a waitress at one point, and it was by far the hardest job I've ever had. I used to be a server at the Heinemann's at River Point.
Oh, we love Heinemann's, right, everybody?
Yeah. So rough, such a rough job, but such a great food, rough job. Yeah. Where's my Post-it here? So I thought I would start at almost the beginning. There's a great foreword in this book by my colleague Crystal Marie Moten that really frames the book well, but I'll say my piece. So this is an excerpt from the very beginning of chapter 1. This is how we save the world. Launching a startup in the first year of the pandemic was, for me, an experience of chaotic, continuous learning. As I filed the papers to claim my business name, I imagined myself curled up in my reading nook, sipping tea and leafing through a curated list of books and articles about entrepreneurship and industry trends and personal growth. But when I met with my first potential client on my first day open for business, it became immediately clear that the market had other ideas. All of my curiosities about what entrepreneurship was and how to do it came together in one urgent question. What could I offer to the person right in front of me in exchange for real money? The answer to this question sparked a cascade of new ones. How much should I charge? What should the contract say? Where, when, and how would the project unfold? How would I collect payments? Every one of these questions created new threads that were deeply satisfying to unravel. Even as I listened to my bank's hold music and squint my eyes at tax collection regulations, the monotony and anxiety are made more bearable by the enjoyment I take from figuring things out that serve a purpose and move my work forward. being a business owner continues to fill me with agency, curiosity, and joy. In addition to the many challenges that come with starting any business, this cultural moment was particularly complicated. When I launched Hikma in October 2020, the world was still trying to figure out how to keep spinning during a pandemic. Thanks. The world was still trying to figure out how to keep spinning during a pandemic that would clearly last a lot longer than many of us had anticipated. Employees took flight en masse in the Great Resignation. Universities scrambled to build virtual classrooms, and graduate students and administrators alike watched the tenure track evaporate even faster than it was doing before the pandemic. The Black Lives Matter movement and biblical-level climate catastrophes demanded that funders, businesses, universities, and individuals take a hard look at their social and climate responsibilities. As I started my business, I faced constant reminders that the world was literally and figuratively burning down around us, and that we need change in deep, complex ways. The polarization of our civic dialogues and difficulty of connecting decision makers with reliable information added fuel to the fire. A cursory look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals shows how much work we have to do and the many pathways needed to save our planet and the people in it. While there are any number of technologies that might solve targeted problems, inventions alone will not save the world. Physical and digital products must be complemented with people who can interpret context, anticipate the implications of new ideas, and monitor the implementation of new tools for unanticipated consequences on our world. The systems level change we so desperately need requires people who lead with empathy and thrive in ambiguity. The world needs humanists. Thanks.
We're going to circle around to that statement. I do have a question here jotted down that I want to dig into that. The world needs humanists. But first, I want to congratulate you. You are an author. How does that feel? How are you feeling?
A little nervous right this second, but good. I mean, it's good. It's exciting to put your ideas out into the world. It's exciting. It kind of comes in waves, feels real in waves. I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit, but when you publish a book, you have different stages of things you have to do. You do the proposal, you send the chapters, they review the chapters, tell you what they think about the chapters. There's a little bit more back and forth, and one of the steps is to send like the whole Word document that they review, and then they send back to you with copy edits, where they give all the edits, and you have to decide which typos you're going to accept and things like that. And I pictured that being one of these moments where I would have tons of time to really reflect on the book. But I got my copy edits over 9 hours before my baby was born last October. It's like so many things about being a business owner and this whole professional life where they don't play out the way that you think they will, but they're just so exciting, and you learn about yourself in so many different ways. So testing my new frontiers here, I guess.
Absolutely. A lot of this book is about being brave, and I think all of that is such a testament to your bravery. So that is more than most people can handle in those 9 hours, that's for sure. So let's start out with a little bit of the history behind how this book came to be. In their introduction, you have a graphic, I don't know if anyone can see this, a graphic that shows your experience moving from academic to business owner as a game of snakes and ladders. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how we came to be sitting here.
Sure, absolutely. Well, some of the people here have known me since I was in diapers, so I'll give a multi-layered version of the journey. So I got my PhD in medieval English literature from the University of Notre Dame. Graduated almost a decade ago from that. And that was an experience that I went into thinking from when I was an undergrad, that I was going to be a medievalist. I was going to be a professor. That was the only career I could imagine for myself. And then I learned a lot about myself during my PhD, and I encountered a lot of challenges that I wasn't anticipating. So my comprehensive exams were a tricky time. You have to essentially read for a year and then do these speed exams, these speed essays to talk about your work, and it was tricky. It was challenging. I did well. I ultimately passed, but I had to redo pieces of it. And in the process, I learned a lot about office politics and sort of the personal elements of academia that had not been a part of my studies before that. So I started to learn what it was like to be an academic professional. And then my mom got really sick. She was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer. A lot of people here know that. So I spent a lot of time at home over the next year. And my priorities just shifted. I started figuring out that it was really important to me, for instance, to be able to stay around family, and that looking for a professor job anywhere in the world, which is kind of what you have to do. The year I would have gone on the academic job market, there were 13 jobs for medievalists in North America in my department. And so in order to go that track and do the things that would have positioned me for those jobs, I sort of had to put blinders on and make the decision to move wherever that job was going to be. And I didn't want to do that. And I was also increasingly aware that I really wanted to do something that would be accessible and that I could talk about with my family, and that would make me feel like I was having a direct impact on the world. And I didn't know what that thing would be. So I did an internship at the National Endowment for the Humanities, where I had amazing mentors who taught me how to write for broader audiences and how to interview scholars and how to think in public ways about very, very rigorous research, which really trained me well for the work that I do. I work mostly with academics now. So I did that, and then in the process, I met my now husband, who at the very moment that I was deciding not to be a professor, decided that that's what he wanted to do. So he's a civil engineer. He had a few more places to apply, but still limited geographically. So that's how, just as I got my first nonprofit job, he got his offer in Canada. And that is how we came to move to Vancouver, British Columbia in 2018. And I worked in different roles at a university there for a while, and I liked a lot of things about them, but the pandemic was kind of a moment where I realized that now that everything was virtual, it was just as easy as someone in New York City to meet with me as it was to meet with their neighbor across the hall. And I had learned all these skills to work with research in different ways, in grants and training. I developed this course that we delivered online that was really popular in my last role, and I just decided to go for it and try to do it on my own. That was about 5 years ago, and the business has grown a lot since then and seen a lot happen in the world that we've adapted to. It's been really good, but not a road I imagined for myself at all.
Do you want to give just a short description of what your business is, and then we can tie it into the rest of the conversation?
Totally. So in Canada, I refer to my business as a knowledge mobilization agency, which is sort of different terminology than we would talk about here, but I have clients all over the world. So we work mostly with academics, but basically with people who are doing rigorous technical research and have ideas of ways that they want to make a difference in the world. So say you are developing a new form of ultrasound, and you decide that you really want this ultrasound to be applicable in different kinds of hospitals. You want it to be accessible to communities that might not otherwise be able to afford or travel to places where ultrasounds exist. You need funding to do that. So some of the work that we do is around storytelling to help figure out how to write grants, how to talk about the work, how to explain this invention that you have to new people. But you also need to think about the logistics of integrating that technology into different locations. What kinds of challenges might you face? Who's going to pay for it? What are the implications of introducing a new technology in an existing health system? All those kinds of things. Who do you need to work with to make that thing happen? And then once it's in, how do you develop these governance models, these partnership models? How do you have the right conversations with partners and patients and everybody involved to figure out how to make that system work so that it actually has good outcomes for patients? Only a fraction of the research that happens in universities actually makes its way out. They say, let me see if I can get the statistic right, only 14% of clinical practice is actually informed by research-based evidence, at least in Canada. And we see that across fields. It's really difficult to get research out of the universities and into the hands of the people who need it, and often the people who are paying for it with their tax dollars. So I work with really dedicated academics who know how to do the technical work well, but are sometimes looking for support with the people parts of it and the storytelling parts of it to figure out how to make it more accessible.
That's wonderful to know that there's support for people who maybe focus more on the research and the development, that there's someone who's actually helping them put it out into the world, because that is, of course, the barrier. And so there's this gap that you're filling in order to get that new technology or that new idea out into the world. That's amazing. Let's start. So this book is when people are at the beginning of their journey.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not so much the people who you work with on a daily basis, and more for, let's say, new graduates, or who is this book specifically targeting?
That's a great question, and it's got layers, but I'll say when I started writing this book, really it was for me. When I started my business, I didn't think I knew what I was doing. But I realized a little while in that actually I had experience as an entrepreneur that I hadn't realized, both from my work as a graduate student, where I had to identify gaps in the knowledge market and figure out how to address needs in creative ways and work with all kinds of people, and write things and pitch things and do all that stuff. But also this freelance work that I had done for the National Endowment for the Humanities had required me to write invoices and contracts and do work on deadline and have tricky conversations with an editor who's a client about how to do the work. And so all of those skills kind of clicked and mobilized, and that's when I started to realize that recognizing what you already bring to the table and figuring out how to frame it and how to tell that story makes it easier to get paid fairly and manage contracts better. And so I really wanted to share that knowledge because I myself, as a grad student, had been freelancing, and I knew so many other grad students who were getting paid very little, stipends, not salaries, often with inadequate health care, and had been freelancing in different ways to try to make ends meet. But when you're in that point where you are doing this work out of a combination of sort of being interested in writing that index or doing that copy edit or tutoring that friend's kid, there's a sense of trying to nurture that relationship with that person and that sense of you really need the money, but often you see it as someone else doing you a favor. And what I'm trying to do with the book in part is get people who are in that situation to flip it and realize that, one of the reasons that so many startups fail is because people have this idea for the next big widget or whatever, and they spend years trying to find a customer for it. And they never do. But if you're a person who people are seeking out to say, hey, can you help my kid? Can you help me with this really tricky problem? Can you help me achieve this thing? They see something in you. They see a way that you can bring value that you maybe haven't seen in or articulated for yourself. So the book is about building on your strengths. The book is about recognizing what you already bring to the table, the skills you already have, and figuring out how to mobilize them. So the audience I had in mind when I first started writing it was my friends who were in that position, but really, it's not just for graduate students who are doing that work, it's for anybody who's got this drive to do something different in the world, got this skill set that they're trying to figure out how to apply differently, to think more creatively and expansively about those opportunities.
Let's talk about some sort of basic fundamentals of the book.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, in case anyone is wondering about this or has different words that translate into your understanding of what the book is, I'm going to start really basic. When you talk about humanists,
Mm-hmm.
who are you talking about?
I'm talking about people who have what are often kind of written off as soft skills. So you can take it as the academics who are in traditional humanities fields, the English majors, the history majors, the medievalists like me. But you can also talk about it in terms of the people who are drawn to creativity and storytelling and have developed these skills that are relationship-based, that are storytelling-based, that have found ways to bring value to the world that aren't often labeled and valued as much as super technical skills. And people who are able to thrive in ambiguity, people who are driven by their curiosity.
I think that was what's fascinating to me about talking about these sort of soft skills and this translation of taking those skills, whether you learn them in academia or as a scholar, or you are just an inherently curious person, that this is about almost translating a language, which it's trying to take what we understand the humanities to be and what scholarship is, and taking it and translating it into maybe more pragmatic or more practical ways of framing or storytelling around what our skills are.
Right.
And that is, I think, a really interesting connection to your history as a medievalist, which almost sounds like a pun, and I apologize for that. But
No worries.
and that you are doing that work of helping people translate, whether it's through the work with Hikma or the work with the book. Now that we know what you mean by humanists, let's talk about, why does the world need humanists?
The world needs humanists for a bunch of reasons. But one of them, I think, that is key is this increasing polarization, reliance on things like artificial intelligence, on things like the information that the algorithms give us when we go on our social media, letting sort of anger and a sense of belonging to a particular camp dictate the way that we think about things. The world needs people who are willing to stick with problems and stick with questions for more than the time it takes to read a Facebook post. Truly grapple with those questions, engage with each other, try new ways of having conversations and bringing people together. It takes a lot of resilience. It takes a lot of tolerance for discomfort and ambiguity to stick with a hard question for a long time and not be satisfied with an easy answer. And it's certainly not only people who have graduate degrees in medieval studies or, modern critical theory or whatever to do that. But the people who have the curiosity to want to know more than the information that's being offered to them, and to synthesize different pieces and to have the conversations about it. I think those are the people that we need to make sense of all of these tools that are being developed by our profit-driven world.
I had a question toward the end of my list here about we grapple with the role of human intelligence in light of the emerging AI, and that does show that this kind of engagement with the bigger questions, and even from something as basic as learning how to prompt AI to give you the answer.
Totally.
You still need to understand what you're prompting it to try to pursue in terms of providing an answer. And so I think this kind of thinking is going to be more valuable as we move forward with AI than what we fear, which is that all human thought is going to be taken over by AI. Would you agree with that this sort of scholarship or this sort of curiosity, if we want to take it out of academia, is actually going to be something really valued as we go forward?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to take AI as an example, not that I'm an AI expert by any means, but one thing I think people often forget when working with tools like ChatGPT is that these algorithms are designed to please you. They are designed to reinforce the things that you want to read. And so if you ask ChatGPT a question and it gives you an answer, you can't be satisfied with that answer. It's a huge challenge in universities now that people are writing essays using ChatGPT. And not only is it stitching together sources that haven't been checked, not only is it using other people's work instead of coming up with your own, but its accuracy is not the priority. And often when you're asking a complicated question, it's not a question of accuracy, it's a question of looking at all the evidence available to you and making a decision about what is right. And so asking the questions about, why did I frame my question right this way? And why is this machine giving me this answer? And okay, this answer might be a piece of the puzzle. It might be really helpful in terms of narrowing my search or reframing what I'm doing. These tools are here to stay, so like it or not, we need to work with them, but they are actually a positive thing in a lot of ways if we can learn to use them responsibly. But we need to keep the human part in there to do that well and have it augment our work instead of completely stifling our creativity and ability to work together.
So during reading the book, one of the words that kept coming up in my head was the word useful.
Mm.
And we quantify the value of a humanities degree, for example, with usefulness, right? How many people have either heard or asked someone, what are you going to do with that degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to put that to use? How are you going to make money? And obviously we equate usefulness with making money in this culture. Many scholars turn to teaching as a way to be useful, right? Mm-hmm. And bring up another cohort of scholars. And then we hear that phrase, those who can't do teach, right? Mm-hmm. So we negate that as well and say that that's not useful enough because we're not actually doing the thing. What do you make of how society regards usefulness in terms of academia and scholarship? And why is that kind of pigeonholing really putting people who are in the humanities sort of on the back foot and in a defensive place before they're able to actually get out into the world and make the kind of change that they're capable of?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a tough question. I think over the last few decades, over the last few centuries, ideas about what the purpose of scholarship is have changed a lot. And so this is a very difficult question. I'm trying to come up with a good answer. No, it's a doozy. It's a doozy, especially these ways. It's a doozy. Let me see. So why is there a sense that the humanities are not useful? Why did you have that, do you want fries with that t-shirt, mm-hmm. on the professor mm-hmm. who walked into your defense? It's a question that we could approach from multiple directions. There is the person who is on the outside, doesn't have a lot of experience with academia, is looking in and saying, I have never seen or met a medievalist. Why are my tax dollars paying for this person to write their book or dissertation or whatever? What's the point? I don't see any benefit to this. There's that person. There's the student who's in the university saying, I'm really passionate about this thing. I have no idea what I can do with it other than go be a professor, and I'm now seeing that there are no professor jobs. And there's the faculty member who thinks it's funny and okay to walk into a room and do that.
I really wonder if in this day and age that would be allowed, but that was the 90s.
Sure, the 90s, but it happens in more subtle ways all
yes.
the time. A few of the people that I cite in the book who have written more extensively about sort of academic culture and what's happening within the universities, which is something that I kind of sidestep in my own work because it's not a path I chose, talk about the fact that within universities, the way that people are professionally trained, who are getting these skills of writing, teaching, building this consensus in these conversations, doing all of this work, those are people who may have existed in times where there were more professor jobs. And so they really were able to stay in that track and have never had to go look for a job outside the university. And so when they're providing career advice, often from a position of kindness and a real sense of the worth of their work, they may not have any sense of what advice to give. Like, they know the path that they took. They don't know everyone else's path. Mm-hmm. I think there's a sense of mentors who are the only people that grad students, emerging professionals often have access to, mm-hmm. not having the experience themselves to say the right thing, and not necessarily knowing where to direct their students to get other advice. I wrote this op-ed for Inside Higher Ed with a colleague of mine, Andrea Webb, who is a faculty member. And it was about advice for faculty seeking to help their students. And one of the pieces of advice that we gave is get on LinkedIn, because even if it's not a very useful tool for networking within academia, even if it's not the way you meet your own colleagues, if you connect with the people you know in the world on LinkedIn, that's how your students will see your network in a way that you might not see it. So they might say, oh, I see that you're connected with this person. Maybe it's your brother-in-law who's an accountant. Or, oh, I see that you know someone who's now the curator of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or who's doing this other really cool thing at a nonprofit that you had beers with this person when you were in college and haven't spoken to them in a while. but it costs you nothing to reach out and say, hey, I have a grad student who's interested in your work. I don't know anything about it. Could you have a coffee with them? That kind of networking is really intuitive in academia. But the idea of branching out is something that I think there needs to be a cultural shift for. Another more concise way to say that is there is a responsibility within academia for academics to show the value of their work and make it visible. And I don't think that every humanist within the university context is rising to that challenge. So that's a piece of the puzzle. I think another piece of the puzzle is that these so-called soft skills are so undervalued in our environment, and often they're the skills that people build who don't have access to the same opportunities. A lot of them are skills associated with women, the community building, the writing, the storytelling, the kind of mentoring and nurturing for many generations have been seen as kind of women's work, and so soft, yeah, exactly, and so they haven't been valued, and a lot of those things are the ones that we learn in fields like mine. If you have follow-ups to that, I will answer them.
Oh, that's great. No, that's great. It's a sort of a spokes in the wheel, right?
Yeah.
And, but I think that's a good segue in saying that with reaching out or branching out, where we need to minimize the divide between business and academia, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's connecting the skills that a scholar might have for deep ways of thinking, for being able to problem solve, which is incredibly useful in a business, and being able to speak that same language, right? And so when we're talking about academics moving into business, the subtitle of your book is Build a Business with Purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and you talk about purpose-driven entrepreneurship. So now we're talking about humanists or scholars who have decided to not take the academic track, but to look elsewhere for how they can change the world, how they can affect things positively. So what is purpose-driven entrepreneurship, and why is it the answer for humanists who decide that academia is not the route to take?
Well, it's not the answer for all humanists, which I think is an important point, is entrepreneurship's risky. Not everyone can absorb the same level of risk. Not everyone is in a position to make what they made in grad school for the first year to see if it works, as I was. But for people who do want to try it, maybe want to try a side hustle, doing some consulting or some tutoring or whatever it is on the side to see if it's a career they want to pursue and that they can get traction in. I think there are different ways to look at purpose. People often understand it as, if I want to do good in the world, I need to work for or start a nonprofit that's going to save three-legged kittens, or whatever it is. I need to go start the most meaningful, positive change organization in the world that uses all of the buzzwords that are now not allowed in grant proposals for the federal government. All these things, this is my responsibility, and I need to figure out how to make money doing that. That's a huge challenge, and it's everyone going into that sort of extreme, socially oriented work. Folks who want to do it and do it well certainly can, but it's not the only way to make a difference. Not every client that I work with ends up having the positive change on the world that we say they're going to in their grant proposals. Sometimes it doesn't work out, and I think I've just taken a lot of money from this person, and now they've started their project, and they're not having that impact. They're not necessarily meeting all of the commitments of this change they want to do. But at the end of the day, I look around and I say, I've created good jobs for several employees, and I've inspired some mentees to figure out how to get fair pay in their own entrepreneurship. And I've taught some people how to write better, which means their research is going to be just a little bit more accessible. And so I hope in the long term that project will be effective. My business has only been around 5 years, which means I don't know what the impact will be of the people I've already worked with. But there are so many ways that you can set higher standards as a business owner, no matter what business you're in. And if you can afford to support your own life and fill your own cup, then you can also do things like serve on the boards of 1 million nonprofits, as my dad does, or make time to teach English as a second language, like my mom did. There there are many, 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 many ways that you can elevate the work we do in the private sector or the public sector or the academic sector, wherever you want to be, by applying these entrepreneurial principles with intention.
A lot of it, I think, would be that we want to align our values and our beliefs with the work that we do.
Yeah.
Right? And so alignment is part of what we're going toward. You address 3 myths about humanists and entrepreneurship. So let's just to take it down to the book level again. This book is a guidebook for humanists or anyone, ultimately, who wants to start a business. Like that, practically speaking, this is a guidebook for starting a business. And it is a guidebook for starting a business that can be geared to people who have an academic history, but also this is accessible to anybody. But there are 3 myths about humanists and entrepreneurship that you talk about. And they are: the academy is the only place you can be a scholar. I don't know the first thing about running a business, and money is dirty. I feel like we should take a vote. Which of the 3 do you want us to discuss?
Money.
Yeah, so that one, like, why is it so hard to talk? Why is it hard for anyone to talk about money, but why is it so hard for humanists to talk about money and then ask for the money that their skills deserve?
Why is it so hard to talk about money? Even now, it's making me cringe up here.
You're like, did you have to pick that one?
No. I think it's important. I think a lot of us who are in fields where we're taught to frame our work as service, again, not only, but certainly a lot of women who are taught to think about our work as community building and teaching and doing the storytelling. We're taught that those things are meant to do good and that accepting money for them somehow cheapens the work that we do. I think this is especially, but not only, true of teachers. And when you're working in an academic environment in particular, there's not a lot of learning. There's not a lot of learning or modeling or instruction around what fair compensation really looks like. So I talked to my friends from college who did not go the academic path, and I try to explain to them the process of writing an academic peer-reviewed journal article and how it costs you money because you spend all of these hours working on it, and then they get volunteer experts to spend a lot of time reviewing it for you, and then the piece eventually gets published, and if you want it to be freely available instead of the publisher taking money for it, in the models as they currently exist, you pay to make that work open access. And this is all framed as the privilege of getting your work out there. Also be understood as this is part of your job. Your job provides you, ideally, professional development funds, and you are getting paid to do this kind of work. But when you are a graduate student, you are not technically getting paid a salary. If you are lucky, you are getting a stipend that covers the bare minimum of your living expenses and maybe some health care. And so you're taught that this is the path, this is the way that you create value in the world. But it doesn't merit an hourly rate. It doesn't matter how many hours you work. These are the metrics you need to hit. You should be grateful for the privilege because so many people didn't get this prestigious opportunity that you got. And so you should take that money that's barely helping you make ends meet, and you should spend it to go to conferences across the world that you pay to travel to and pay to attend, and present work that doesn't formally get graded or recognized in any kind of way except maybe going on a CV, which is a really long resume, and hopefully leads you toward more articles that you can pay to publish. So the idea of thank you. Yeah. So the idea of there's this phrase, you can't eat prestige, and it's true. But I think there's also a sense of, there's a disconnect from the idea of living a life where you're providing service and teaching that you also have to be able to sustain yourself. You can't serve others unless you can put a roof over your head. And that's a really hard thing to stomach when you're working in a culture that just asks you to give and give and give, and where burnout is so high and mental health can be so low, and where there are not a lot of models for what it looks like to be treated fairly. And there are a lot of toxic professional behaviors that exist in these echo chambers where they just perpetuate. So one of my hopes with the book is that every reader will challenge themselves to recognize the skills that they already have and think about different contexts where they apply them, so that you can think about the things you can do in terms of their market value within and beyond the academy. And if you can think to yourself, even if it's not the direction you want to go, you know, if I were working in this other business, if I were doing the same thing at Google, they would use these words to talk about it. I would be able to have this kind of impact. This is the kind of money I might be able to make. And if I wanted to get there, here's how I would go about it. You don't have to take that path. You don't have to decide that you want to go try and work for Google. But it might give you some more language and confidence to ask some questions about the way that you're being treated in the work that you're doing, and think about how to present yourself as a professional differently and challenge the systems that you're in.
I think one of the other reactions that keep us from sort of asking for what is worth is that there's this perspective that we chose this, like you chose this, so you could have chosen to do something else, and that brings us back to the usefulness and all that kind of stuff. But that it is hard to ask for money for something that you either chose to do or that you love. Right? That language around that can be really difficult. Okay, so we are already coming to our Q&A section. I've got about 5 more minutes to ask another question, but I just wanted to give everybody a heads up. If you want to think now about anything you want to ask Erica, I'm going to do a question or two, and then we'll do a little Q&A before we wrap up, because we did get a little bit of a late start. So the sort of closure question for me is, what are some of the first steps a humanist can take to start their own business or offer their specialty service? Because this really is emblematic of what can be found in the book.
One of the exercises that I've been taking from the book and applying a lot in training, that's for humanists, but it's for anybody. You could do it right now if you wanted. Grab your copy, get ready. It's in chapter 2. Is design a service you could deliver by tomorrow. Imagine somebody comes to you and says, I need this thing by 5 p.m. tomorrow. I know you can do it. I need it fast. What is that thing that you could complete in, say, 4 hours or less that you could do for someone to create value for actual money? I'll give some examples that are common to humanities graduate students. Might be copy editing or tutoring or writing a blog post. Some of these things I've already mentioned. But for you, it might be something completely different. I guarantee you there is something. First, think about what the seed of that idea is. Think about how to set your boundaries. What would be the minimum viable product version that you could do in 4 hours? But then if you were going to say, look, I can do this for you by 5 p.m. tomorrow, but if you give me a week, I could do it in this more complicated and expensive way. And if you give me a month, well, I could do it in this totally other premium way that might interest you and create all kinds of value you haven't even thought of yet. So by doing that, by putting that entrepreneurial lens on your work, even if you don't want to work that way, it forces you to put some language around your skills. It forces you to think about how much time the things that you're good at actually take, and the words that you would use to communicate the value proposition, the value of that thing to your customer, to a particular person. So the book talks about how to do that, to find the right language to talk about your skills, to think about their market value, to think about their relationship to the actual people you want to work with, because getting to choose who you work with is a huge part of the entrepreneurial lens in the book as a whole. And the book kind of steps through different thought experiments that may be really useful if you're already have a business or wanting to start one and want to apply them in a very tangible way. But my hope is that they're great thought experiments for everyone, to think a little bit more creatively or just bring a different lens to the work and the strengths that they already have.
I was applying that 3-tier strategy even to thinking about things for our business. So it's very practical advice in there for anyone who reads it. And then I think the final question that I have for you is, what's next? What are you working on? What's around the corner after this book is out into the world and you're on to the next thing?
Well, thank you. That's a great question.
You're a mom.
I'm a mom,
You're a
yeah.
mom.
My baby turned 9 months old last week, Kareem. So I'm kind of just going at his pace. It's his world now. I'm just living in it. I think it's been a really interesting challenge to design my own mat leave. I had a tough pregnancy where I had to shut things down a little bit earlier than anticipated, which forced me to build and train. I had these great people, but I had to train them and give them responsibilities a lot faster than I was ready to. And they're amazing. So I have this great culture of people who are building courses that, I'm theoretically in charge of, but it's kind of the monkey running the zoo when they're on vacation. So I'm doing that. I'm leaning more into the teaching work, teaching in a different way, teaching different kinds of organizations. I love that piece a lot. And it works better for my schedule as a mom than some of the more intense grant writing work does, although I'm doing a little bit of both. So I think I will continue to reimagine what the next steps of the business are. It's a lot of sort of reinforcing the things that we've had a lot of success with and the relationships that we've built, and a lot of letting things fall away that I learned a lot from, but are maybe not the things I want to be focusing on in my business, and trying to figure out how to not work all the time because I simply can't anymore.
So does anyone out there come up with a question while we were closing up those last two questions? Anyone have a question? We got one over here.
For people who haven't read your book, the picture that you portray of the educational system and how it equips those humanistic people who take those courses would seem to be in a state of crisis. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how you're aimed at humans. What about the educational institutions to respond to this challenge?
That's a great question. So should I repeat the question for the recording? Is that the question is?
Yeah.
Yeah? So I'll paraphrase, you tell me if I got it right. What's the call to institutions to respond to this internal crisis of preparing emerging scholars and practitioners for the next steps? So one thing I'll say is that a lot of institutions have been trying to figure this out for a really long time. City University, New York, for example, is an institution I've had the privilege of working with to test a few of my different training programs since very early in Hikma. And they've come up with some really innovative ways of preparing PhDs who are already first-gen people who come to the program eyes wide open with an understanding of this change they want to create in the world. And so CUNY got significant Mellon funding to build different models for training graduate students, and a lot of that has to do with connecting them with non-academic partners, putting them from the early stages of their scholarship to work on impactful problems and saying, you're a humanities person? Okay, here's a nonprofit working with the city trying to build this community garden. Go do it. Go help them figure out how to solve the thing that they're trying to solve for and find new creative dimensions to bring to it so that it can also inform scholarship and the ways that we do it. And it can lead to more rigorous methodologies of thinking, and it can lead to more peer-reviewed work, but can also build something that's directly valuable for the community. There are a lot of really creative models out there for letting graduate students do that kind of work, for letting them write dissertations that are breaking some of the conventional ways of writing a dissertation that just stays in a vault to create something that has more immediate impact, instead of the impact being that 5 years from now you turn it into a book. One of the things that drives me crazy as a medievalist is that people describe dissertations as bad books. The step of your next job is to write a good book loosely based on this thing that you built your career on. There are a lot of wonderful mentors out there. My advisor, I should say, is one of those people who really understood the power of networking and has been really supportive of this book and has been telling me that I still need to publish my dissertation since I graduated and took a non-academic job, and is delighted that I have now published a book, even if it's not quite the book she imagined. My bad book went a different way. So I think it's about equipping faculty with the knowledge and empowering them to think differently about the kinds of support that they give. And I think they face a similar challenge that a lot of graduate students face, where you're looking at this wide expanse of everything beyond the academy, and you think you have to learn a million things in order to be useful. As a grad student, sometimes people will say to you when you graduate, like, just do a data coding boot camp, or just go to law school, you'll be fine, you know? And I think faculty sometimes feel that pressure too. This isn't a path that I took, so how could I possibly help someone else figure it out? And so I think there could be more confidence within the system and more learning to think about how these skills translate. And I also think that the more work universities do to connect with non-academic organizations and put their graduate students out in front of those opportunities, the more they can not only help with that job transition, but also reinforce all this knowledge mobilization stuff so that organizations are getting the benefit of that research in new ways. Did I answer your question?
And we have time for one more quick
Yep.
question.
Yep, I was gonna say, can we squeak one more in? Anybody else? Anyone have one? No, we're good. We hit the 7:30 right on the dot. Oh, yeah, Amy.
So I have a friend, like when you were describing yourself and academia, she's a high school teacher, she got her master's degree in English. I would consider her a humanitarian. What term did you use?
Humanist?
Humanist. Where whenever she's a school teacher, she doesn't make a lot of money, and she's always like, I need to make more money, I need to make more money. She loves what she's doing, and so she'll do these like side hustles, like where she's into like meditation and podcasting and writing, and she'll always say, well, I don't want to make any money from it. I'm never going to charge anybody from it. So as you were
Right.
talking about that mindset, whereas I am somebody who I will always, when somebody's asking me to do something, I will either consciously or subconsciously think, how much am I going to get paid for this? So almost all of my interactions, which is not healthy either. But when we are talking about things like this, I feel like I'm pushing towards her, like, you should be making money. How do you feel like I could best support her so that she can expand in the way that feels right for her, but I'm not kind of allowing her to dismiss the value that she can provide?
So the question is, how might you support or advise a friend who is a teacher who wants to make more money and is doing these all these side hustles but is uncomfortable about charging for them? So the book says a few things about this. I'll just say one for time. If it's the case that she's hesitant to charge for the work because she feels like she's doing good and therefore shouldn't be collecting money for it, I think one important thing to remind her of is not everyone has the luxury of worrying about that. So if you are doing this work for free, that is creating value, you are creating barriers to people who really need the money and are doing the work to charge for it. Do you know what I mean? Like, if there are other people in the world who can provide that inspirational podcast that's really going to help people, but they can't afford to do it for free, then by offering up that labor for free instead of charging fair market rate for it, you're actually reducing the amount that someone else can get. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. That's what I would say. Is you may also be devaluing other people's labor, and so if you're working in an environment where you're trying to support the collective and raise people up, then it's kind of a false assumption that not getting paid is somehow doing good in itself.
Maybe you should buy her the book.
Yes. That was a great answer. I thank you so much. This has been a rich conversation. I always wish we had more time when we have great guests. And I do hope that you buy this book for any of the people in your lives or yourself who are finding it difficult to use all of their skills, translate those skills into the system that we have, which is the system we have, where we need to make money in order to be able to give those services and provide those good things out into the world. And that is the gift that your book gives, and I hope that you all gift this book and tell other people about this book. And thank you again to Erica for a wonderful conversation.
Give her a hand.
Thank you.